Hello and welcome back to the Off Camera On Record podcast. This is brought to you by Aaron Ross Media Company, and we're so glad to have you join us today. And today we're at the desk. We're at the desk because we're doing a mini series of sorts covering all of the basics of podcasting. Podcast is something that we specialize in here at Aaron Ross Media Company. I have shot well over 200 podcast episodes, probably approaching closer to 300. My team is still working on actually doing the calculation, because it's not until you're like 150 episodes deep that you realize, I think this might actually be a thing, and I think I should start actually keeping track of how many of these things I'm really filming out here. But it's something that, especially since the pandemic has exploded nationwide and in the world of production, you've seen a significant increase in podcast productions on small scale, large scale, super consistent, one-offs, everything is going crazy in the world of podcasting. And so that's why we're doing this series. And I want to start with the most basic, simplest, foundational level here. We are going to answer the question today: what is a podcast? That's right. Start at square one. What is a podcast? Leave it in the comments below and pause this video right now and answer the question if you think you know what the answer is. Are you done? Did you do it? All right. What is a podcast? I'll give you one of the standardized definitions that we have here, right? Fundamentally speaking, a podcast is an on-demand audio show delivered through an RSS feed. But in 2025, most successful shows also include video on YouTube, because that tends to be where most of the discovery happens. So traditionally, audio is the core of the podcast. All podcasts center around having good audio. That's the foundation. But video is the delivery mechanism. Video is the marketing arm. Video is the outreach to get new people to discover that you even exist. So that's kind of like the basic kind of understanding of what a podcast is. I like to think of it as the natural evolution of a radio show. And you think about these like great radio talk shows from, decades past, where you can just talk and chat and have guests. It's like everything minus the music, right? And then that's kind of the core of what makes a great podcast. It's why you'll notice that a lot of like the sports commentators were able to easily, seamlessly transition from sports radio to now sports podcasting, essentially doing the same thing that they were doing on a radio show, but just doing it in a format that's super familiar, in a format that is really popular now and that everyone seems to be super excited about. So what are the core formats of a podcast? Well, it's really kind of simple. You can have a solo show, kind of like what I got going on here. It's just me at a desk by myself. And this is a great format for delivering like educational content, delivering information, brand authority. If you're in a company, there's this one guy who has a really great solo show podcast that I've filmed before. And he's talking about, he's a lawyer who talks about divorce, right? And he has all these like really interesting stories and really interesting tips and really interesting information. So when you have something that's like niche, especially if it's based upon like the thing that you do all day, every day, your passion, your career, solo format is really actually great for that. And it does help sell the personality so that you don't end up relying on guests and relying on other things, as we'll get to in a second. So the next format that is very popular is the interview format. And you'll see many podcasts, especially in like quote unquote like industries, like music industry. You'll see this not so much in comedy, but comedy has a fair amount of this as well. It's the podcast that's basically like the modern web-based reinterpretation of, Oprah or 60 Minutes or those type of traditional platforms reinvented for YouTube. And so these are podcasts where Every episode is about a new guest coming in to tell their story. And it tends to be all within a theme or within an industry. Like I said, music is the best example. Shot a lot of music podcast episodes that were interview based. And those are really great for building community around the larger thing, whether it's a genre of music, whether it's music in general, whether it's a particular instrument, whatever it is. Like, you can create a really great interview style show in any lane, in any niche, and it does a really good job of helping you personally create connections and network within your industry. Having people on your show as guests is a really effective way to get them in your phone book and to create opportunities for future projects, future collaborations, future things that will help make everybody money. Because at the end of the day, it's about passion and entertainment, but then to continue to do it and to sustain it beyond just like a hobby, you do need to find a way to monetize it. The next type of podcast format that we will gloss over real quick is the roundtable format, as it's traditionally known. And think about this more like any of those podcasts that you've seen that don't rely on interviews, but it's more than one person. And it's kind of like this team, this friend group, whether it's like a great duo, a trio, a room of 5, 6 people. It doesn't really matter how many people are in the room, but you'll notice that like there are this roundtable type format that's really based upon the same group of people discussing like the same kind of world of either topics or niche or community or whatever. And that builds personality. That's built purely on the personality of all these different people mingling together and creating something that's interesting and inviting. And the successful versions of that format are shows that make you want to be one of the friends in the group. As an audience member, it makes you wish that you were in the room hanging out with them. They're so cool. They're so interesting. They're so knowledgeable. Whatever it is, the thing that's like hooking you in, it does a really good job when done well. Let's just say it does a really good job of creating that psychological relationship. The next style of format that I want to get into is the narrative style format. So narrative style formats tend to be highly produced documentary style formats. And this is like when you talk about like the crime dramas, when you talk about the historical podcasts that really get into telling the story of a thing, and it's very well researched. Oftentimes there's like scripted element of it, or it's just like so well researched that they know exactly what they're going to say as far as the story of this moment in time. And those are kind of like really, really old radio. When you think about it, think about like War of the Worlds back in the 1930s, creating this audio soundscape world that's inviting. Maybe it's scary, maybe it's dramatic, maybe it's sad, maybe it's frightening. That really hits at an emotional level. And, you know, the high production value of those, just the sheer amount of research, the sheer amount of coordination and storytelling that goes into those are like their own captivating universe. So if you are somebody who is like a historian, documentarian, somebody who's really interested in going really deep, doing like these iceberg type videos where you just go through every possible level of this one thing, narrative style podcasting might be the lane for you. And then last but not least is a hybrid format. And a hybrid format is a very generic way of saying you can do whatever you want at the end of the day, right? There are no rules for this. This is independent media. And the cool thing about independent media is you can always kind of reinvent the format. You can always combine a little bit of narrative style with a little bit of solo style, with a little bit of interview style, and create something that is constantly changing and fluctuating and doing things that resonate with your audience, but also kind of resonate with your own creativity and your own desire to kind of be free in your content creation world. So those are the core podcast formats. Now that we understand like the general format of podcast, we need to get into some of the more like practical, technical things. So where do podcasts live? platforms, why, YouTube, all these things. The short and sweet of it is that audio podcast traditionally, it's an RSS feed that's basically like communicating your audio files to Spotify, Apple, Amazon, etc., right? And you don't even need to know what these things are or what they mean in order to be a successful podcaster, launch a podcast, do a podcast. You'll inevitably, when you make the decision, oh, I want to produce podcasts or I want to do my own podcast, you'll inevitably make the decision to look for, podcast distribution services like, Google, how do I get my podcast on YouTube, or how do I get my podcast on Spotify or on Apple Music? And podcast distribution companies essentially provide the RSS feed service, right? So all you need to know is that you sign up with one of these distribution companies, you upload the audio files and the titles and the thumbnails and any of that other information for all of your podcast episodes. And they are the ones who generate the RSS feed that delivers the content to these audio podcast platforms. But as far as video goes, that's just the regular world of YouTube, right? So a lot of podcasts, well, most podcasts now, pretty much all of them, have a video component, a video element that's really the marketing arm of the podcast. And that goes on YouTube the same as any other YouTube video. You shoot your video, you got your titles, your thumbnails, you upload it, you type in your titles, you type in your descriptions and all that stuff. I know that there's a lot of people out there that use some of these AI tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or whatever to help them come up with, titles and descriptions that maybe are a little bit more optimized for YouTube search engine, but it's basic YouTube formula as far as how that goes, right? So that's just the technical side of like, all right, I want to shoot a podcast, I want to make a podcast, I made it. Now what do I do with it? Podcast distribution company, RSS feed to the audio side of the world, and then just a regular YouTube account, upload on YouTube to the video side of the world. And YouTube is also great because you can also house all your shorts, and it's the same short videos that you would use for your Instagram or your TikTok or whatever. For marketing, you can also put those on YouTube, and that'll just help you, spread the word of the channel. And sometimes it's just for an emotional and moral boost because shorts tend to get a lot more views a lot faster than long form videos. So, while you're waiting those months and months and months and months for your hour-long podcast episodes to like break 200 views, it's nice to have like, an easy 1,000 view YouTube short, and some of those YouTube shorts might surprise you. You might have a YouTube short that knocks out of the box. Maybe you got 100 subscribers and it did 20,000 views or whatever. So, don't sleep on the shorts. The shorts are cool. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is what makes a podcast good, right? Because everybody wants to have a podcast, right? And everybody wants to be that person, but not everybody's going to be here 5 years from now. That's just the natural order of things. And what is it about the podcasts that have longevity that makes them different than the ones that do not? Well, let's keep it simple. First of all, it needs to be a clear, understandable delivery. Right? I think that's what kind of helps with very successful podcasts. It's like people need to be able to hear what you're saying and understand what you're saying. We're going to do another video on podcast audio for the technical side of making high quality audio. But as far as like the human side of it, it really helps if people can understand what you're saying. And maybe you have like a crazy accent. And if there's a niche market for that, you should own that entire universe of everybody with that crazy accent and make that your thing, right? Otherwise, if you want a larger reach, you got to have a little bit more universal appeal with just your speaking voice, right? You need a clear point of view. That's another thing that's very important is you need perspective, right? Like why are you different than anyone else, right? Well, you're an individual. Individuals have things that they like and things that they don't like. No two individuals are exactly the same. being able to find the things that you disagree with your surroundings on will actually differentiate you much faster than trying to find all the things that you agree with. You know, you can have a room full of people that agree on everything, and from an audience perspective, it's just all those people are interchangeable. None of them are unique. They're all the same, and they all morph into one bland gray blob of mediocrity. It's the people who have the quirks about them that are actually interesting at the end of the day. So remember that. Clear point of view, but it needs to be based in who you actually are, because it's easier to just tell the truth for years and years and years than to play a character built on, you know, fantasy. The second thing for successful podcasts is a consistent release schedule. Probably the most important thing after like the talent element of it is the consistency of the release. Most great talent that doesn't succeed is because they had an inconsistent schedule, inconsistent releases. They were doing, you know, one podcast, and then 2 weeks later they put out another episode, and then like 4 months later they put out another episode, and then the next week they put out 3 episodes, and it's all over the place. It's random. It doesn't give anyone the ability to rely on it. You know, if I know that it's every Tuesday, or if I know that you guys do this, you know, several times a week, if I know that every week I'm getting something, or every month I'm getting something, or every day I'm getting something, then I'm trusting and relying on that. And the proof is the fact that it hasn't stopped delivering at that repetitive interval, right? And then the last thing that makes a great podcast is you have to give people a reason to click on the next episode, right? That's about like the identity. That's about having a show that's interesting. That's about giving them something where like they want more, right? So when you're thinking about, oh, me and my friends are so cool and we're so funny and like we should start a podcast because we have like the funniest conversations, right? You do have to ask yourself and critically evaluate, right? And you should probably film a couple episodes so that you can look at it objectively. Is this interesting enough that I would want to watch like more and more and more, that I would binge this because it's giving me something? What is it giving me? That's why you'll notice like the niche podcasts tend to grow faster, because you know what you're getting, right? Say you're obsessed with 3D printing and you're doing a podcast that's only about 3D printing, and you're going into every 3D printer and the filament and all of the 3D models and how to format and everyone who's into 3D printing is gaining something from listening to your podcast. They're gaining knowledge. They're gaining information. They're gaining access to people that they didn't even know were members of the community that are really smart or really cool, or learning about new products, new techniques, new this, new that. So you have to understand why, you know, there's that discrepancy between like, I think we're cool and we're funny, and like, I think if we just shared who we are, the whole world would fall in love with us, versus like, I specialize in a thing, right? And then the thing I specialize in already has a pre-built market. It already has an audience, right? So that's another thing to consider. Why is anyone going to hit next episode? And that's something that like will develop over time. So you don't need to like lock into all these things and obsess about them all super crazy right now, but it's just something that you need to be aware of if you're talking podcast, right? And, you know, that's where we get into what the common misconception is. And I've kind of already gone through most of it, but it's just like, it's a misconception that podcasting is just talking, right? It's not just talking. It's not just like shooting the breeze and we're just, you know, there's some, even the people who are the best talkers, right? They are the best because they know how to structure conversation, right? All good podcast episodes follow some form of a structure. Otherwise, it would just be a mess, right? And I think, you know, comedians are really good at this because they know how to structure a sentence to make it funny. They know how to provide a certain amount of detail, how to use certain amount of descriptive words, how to use timing, pauses, and all of these different techniques to make a sentence more interesting, more entertaining, more dramatic, hook you and lock you into this like visual moment, make you visualize the thing. That's a technique. It's not just this arbitrary thing that just happens because like you're interesting. That's a very technical thing. So that's one of the more common misconceptions of podcasting in general. And I think that's one of the reasons why people think it's so easy to do a podcast. And then you have a lot of 1-episode podcasts, 2-episode podcasts that kind of like never get off the ground and they just instantaneously fail from the jump. Try talking for an hour, right? And you'll realize that you might not actually have that much to say. But if you have some structure behind it, where it's not just this freestyle improvisational art, right? But it's actually like, no, we have things we're talking about. I have a structure for how I go through each topic. That is something that you can actually intentionally build hours of content around structure, right? So that brings me into my next point on this what is a podcast episode. And you notice I've been using my podcast voice the entire time. I think it's the reason why I got the headphones on. You don't have to have the headphones on to podcast, by the way. I know a lot of people do. It's really only necessary if you guys are doing like audio in the studio and you don't have like a very high-end studio environment or a team of editors that can kind of separate all of that for you. Because when you play audio out loud, it'll get picked up by the microphone and it'll create kind of like this echoey hallway kind of sound. It's very gross. So if you want to hear the audio that's in that video clip the way it really is, you put the headphones on, you know, it doesn't get picked up by the microphones. All the guests and the host can listen. That's where headphone world really comes from, right? And the fact that podcast is really just the extension of radio. And, you know, on radios, everyone had the headphones on, right? And it's really so that you can hear yourself. So one of the reasons why I'm able to tap into my podcast voice is because I'm actually hearing myself in the headphones and monitoring my vocals in real time so that I have this like feedback loop of like what I sound like, how I'm delivering my words, if you will. And it makes us more conscientious and more aware of our delivery in a way that can actually help us improve our delivery. You know, a lot of us complain that, you know, we don't like our voice because we're not used to what we sound like. Well, that's one of the things you'll have to get over when you do podcasting, right? Get over your voice, get over your face, get over all the things you do. You can improve on certain things like, oh, I always have my chin up too high or my chin too low or this, that. Get over it, improve on the things that are actually distracting, and then just accept the fact that everything else is who you actually are and who you've been this entire time. And you still have friends, you still have people that like you. So it must not be that bad, right? Getting over your insecurities is a big part of just doing media in general. So definitely just be aware of that. It's always a thing. And if you're feeling any kind of weird, insecure feelings from watching your own clips back or listening to yourself in the headphones, just realize that you are like the 7 billionth person to have experienced that this year. Okay. We all go through it. All right. So as we're getting closer to the end of this whole diatribe, the difference between a podcast, a show, and a live stream, right? Kind of semantics now in this day and age. I think we know what a podcast is when we see it. There are certain visual cues, like having like an actual microphone is a visual cue. The headphones might be a visual cue. Everybody in a room with these type of microphones, you notice I have the microphone arm, you know, like this style. That might be another like visual cue. But if it's talk based and there isn't like necessarily a heavy musical component or a heavy other components, right? Then it's pretty much podcast format. I think podcasting is really about conversation. It's really about storytelling. So that kind of has to be the core of the content for it to really count. I think you can do a podcast that is technically a show, and you can have a show that's technically a podcast. Not all podcasts. Well, let's say all podcasts are shows, but not all shows are podcasts, right? Because you can have a game show, you can have a reality show, you can have all different type of shows. It's a very broad term for any content series. But podcast, technically, it is an edited episodic released on demand, and I'm gonna say based on storytelling and conversation, right? A live stream is real time, it's unedited, it's interactive, and you can do your podcast format live, but again, not all live streams are a podcast. Live stream is its own world. It can be video gaming, it could be running around doing an IRL stream, whatever the chat tells you to do, I'm gonna go do it type of vibe where it's super interactive. It could be just rage bait just to get super chat money. Live stream is its own universe, but podcast bleeds into all of these other technical terms. But a podcast is a podcast is a podcast is a podcast. That's it. That's just what it is at the end of the day. All right. So last but not least, and our final point on this particular episode, this particular video, is realistic expectations, growth timelines, and feedback loops. Right. So again, we'll get back into the distinguishing between niche and mass market. Right. Now, statistically speaking, right, most podcasts take between 20 and 40 episodes before they reach any type of consistent traction, right? That's more of like an algorithmic thing. That's a discovery thing. It just takes time and consistency for people to discover you. And you think about it like a bell graph, like an exponential curve, right? One person, then two people, then four people, then eight people, then six people. And it's not exactly purely exponential all the time, but that's more or less how the growth happens, right? It's a small number that constantly doubles itself, but as it becomes a larger number, each doubling is much more significant. So that's just something to know, that it's a time commitment thing. You have to be willing to do. I always tell people, like, if you're not willing to put in 12 months to 18 months, and this is like supposed to be like a full branded exploration, like we're doing this, if you really committed to it and you're saying, oh, I'm doing this, I want this to be a hit show, and you're not willing to put in like 12 months to 18 months of consistent delivery without any consideration of like what those numbers are, and without letting those numbers define you, then you're not going to actually enjoy the successful numbers that you want. It's just not going to happen. Once you start catering to the algorithm, you've kind of lost your format. I think the planning stage is where you do all your research, do all your strategy, and figure out something that you think is going to work, and then just stick to it. I think you can make small, tiny incremental changes over time, but it's going to affect how you appear in the algorithm if the show starts changing too much. So just remember, this is a long game. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right? And like we were saying before, niche topics tend to grow faster than general ones, right? Because in the general ones, like let's say you want to do like, hot topics, and it's just all about being like entertaining and funny. It's like the 2025, 2026 version of Entertainment Tonight, right? Gossip, news, salacious, blah, blah, blah. Well, everyone's doing a version of that, right? Especially with like pop culture news and stuff like that. It's the type of content where there's a ton of content being made about it from people who are not necessarily podcasters or hosts of shows or anything like that. Not even necessarily influencers or anything like that, right? This is the part of the show where I eventually have a drink of my beverage, and we are not sponsored. So every episode I might try a different beverage, but I like to do hydrational beverages in the studio. This is Recover Sports Hydration 180. Right? Pretty good. Let's see. Oh, it's not bad. Rocket Pop flavor. That's a whole other part of the world of podcasting, is sponsors, right? And you got to be willing to shout out the people who pay your bills. They do not pay my bills. But if they did want me to ever do that again, they should consider it. Now, the last thing, right? Well, we were talking about niche versus general, and I think you guys understand the point, right? If you do like a very, very targeted neuroscience podcast that's got like, and you're a neurosurgeon, right? And as far as guests goes, you can get other neurosurgeons and, you know, researchers and all that stuff. And it's like super locked in and focused. It's not going to take a long time before every neurosurgeon's heard of this neurosurgery podcast, right? And so in that regard, it's going to grow because it's a source of information and it's a source of value that's super painfully clear and obvious to that community, right? The general topic stuff, everyone wants to do a video about some Drake stuff or some Kendrick stuff or this, that, and the third. And it's really easy to get lost in the sauce. And that is about the cult of personality. Who's the coolest? Who's the most interesting? It's going to take a lot of time to get people to know you for that, right? So, I guess the last note I have here on my notes is iteration matters, right? Learn from listener feedback, comments, watch time. This helps set realistic expectations for beginners so that they don't quit early, right? And yes, as much as I'm talking about you need to lock in and do your thing, you do need to pay attention to the actual feedback from your community. You're building a community, so the comments that you get are actually kind of important, right? I think if people are giving negative comments, you have to evaluate the difference between a troll negative comment and a constructive feedback, constructive criticism negative comment, right? There are some negative comments where it's just like, you're ugly, blah, blah, blah. And that's just internet trolling, and you can ignore those. They're meaningless, right? But there are negative comments where they're like, oh, the lighting's too harsh, or, you guys are too loud, or I can't ever understand what that guy is saying, or whatever. Actually listen to that, because that is valuable, critical feedback. That could be the thing that's stopping the next 1,000 people from watching this video, is those little technical glitches and mistakes and hiccups or annoying things that you might be doing that you might not even be noticing, right? So if you're watching videos, that's part of the whole community of this whole online experience, is that we can talk to each other and we can actually have, meaningful dialogue that improves everybody in the community, right? And it's all about setting realistic expectations and having realistic commitment. So yeah, before we run too far over time, that's it. That is podcasting 101. What is a podcast? What does it mean? All the stuff. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments. I'll be pretty active in the comments, trying to build this community. Leave a like, share it with people that are trying to make their own podcast, share this channel with people that are interested in podcasting, because we will continue to put out good information about it. And I don't believe in secret information. Yes, I do this for a living and I pay my bills producing this type of content, but I cannot produce all of the podcasts in the world, right? I don't have the time, the energy, the desire. Okay, I can't do it, which means there's plenty of food for everyone. We can all eat. So I'm giving this knowledge away for free because I want you guys to have access to the knowledge. And I'm 100% confident that, Aaron Ross Media Company will continue to still book great clients and do all the most amazing things by being a knowledge authority leader in the industry. And that's part of why we even produce this content, to demonstrate our own skill set and our own knowledge. And, that's part of what podcasting is for, the educational side of it. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for tuning in. Good luck with your podcast. If you're thinking about one, if you've already started one, or if you did one, quit, and now you want to dust it off the shelf and bring it back, good luck with all of that. And just stick to some of the topics and the principles that we talked about today. And I think you'll be fine. I really do. I think you'll be fine if you're consistent, you're responsive to feedback, and you do something that's really genuinely important to you. You got to have a passion for it. Otherwise, it's not going to work, right? And with that said, like, comment, share, subscribe, do all the things, and we'll see you next time. Peace.